There's a certain power in being overlooked. When the world tells a woman you don't belong here, she learns to belong first to herself. When they assume she will shrink, she discovers how to expand. So many of us have carried the weight of other people's assumptions. Too soft, too messy, too young, too loud, too different. We've been placed into boxes we never asked for, told to play small, to wait until we're perfect, to prove ourselves twice over. And yet history is full of women who rose, not despite being underestimated, but because of it. The doubt of others became the spark that lit their fire. To be underestimated is not to be powerless. It is to be underestimated only by them, never by your own soul. And in that gap between who they think you are and who you truly are lies your advantage. Because when they don't see you coming, they can't prepare for your brilliance. Let's dive in. Welcome to the She Leads podcast, a space that empowers women like you to build success in a way that feels authentic, energizing, and aligned with who you really are. In a world that tries to convince us that success means hustling harder and following everyone else's rules, we're here to rewrite the script. This is about success that feels nourishing, not depleting. Success that brings the fulfillment, impact, and recognition you deserve, whilst ultimately giving you the financial power to create the future you want and inspire meaningful change in the world around you. Make sure to hit the follow button so that you never miss an episode, and come and say hello on Instagram. You can find us at she_leads.academy. Let's dive in. I think there has been so many instances in my own life where people have really underestimated me. One memory that always crops up for me was back in school in French. I didn't really pay attention in the class. I don't think I really resonated with the teacher's learning style. I had quite a lot of disruptive kids in the class. So it meant most of the class, the teacher was just basically telling these kids off. And so I kind of checked out of the class, but I did actually really enjoy languages, but never really paid attention in class. And my teacher, during parents' evening, I remember him telling my mum, don't really expect her to get more than a C for her GCSE. And I remember being in that meeting and just kind of thinking to myself, that's really not what I'm here for. I'm not going to get a C. I'm going to prove you wrong. And when my exam results came, I think I shocked everybody. Little did they know that being told you're probably not going to get much more than a C, it sparked something in me. And I remember creating all of my own sort of tapes. Back then it was tapes. Maybe it was CDs, but I was creating these sort of tapes where I'd record myself. I was doing all of this extra study at home. And I just was so determined that I was going to get a top grade. And I did. I actually came out achieving an A star. And I think for me, it was proof that external judgments, they really don't define our internal capability. And I think that moment really planted a seed in me that just because others sometimes don't see my potential, it doesn't mean my potential isn't there. I saw this same pattern actually repeated when I decided to study law. If you've ever seen Legally Blonde, I think it was kind of my Legally Blonde moment, because I think even from studying law at university, I was really not fitting the stereotype of the bookish, quiet, serious law student. I loved to go out. I loved to party. I went to university in London, so I just wanted to absorb everything that London had to offer. And maybe I did often skip classes. I definitely didn't look like the typical future lawyer, at least not the version people expected. And I think I was underestimated again and again. And I remember actually when I started to interview for law firms, and the idea is that you interview with law firms and they will fund your place at law school. So they'll basically pay for you to then go to law school following university. And I remember I did so many interviews, and I remember one particular interview, and this was before I'd even sat down properly. So we were kind of waiting for the proper interview to start. Normally these interviews are very long processes. You'd have kind of a spoken interview, then you'd have psychometric tests, like these law tests. And I sat down with a lady who was going to be a part of the team interviewing me. And before we'd even really kind of got into the interview, she turned to me and said, I don't really see you in law. To be honest, I think I see you more in marketing or PR. And it really, really threw me. And this was before I'd even done the interview. And so it was kind of, again, this feeling of me being underestimated. Yeah, I did. I did end up getting multiple offers from top law firms. And once again, the very assumptions that dismissed me became the fuel to prove myself capable. And more than that, it was to prove that there isn't just one way to succeed. And then I think when I even moved into business, the theme showed up again. I remember resisting telling people about what I was building, worried that I wouldn't be taken seriously. I second-guessed myself constantly. My life at the time, when I first started out as a coach, it felt very, very messy. And I told myself, how could I coach others when I don't have it all perfectly together? And that fear of being underestimated almost held me back from stepping into the work that I now really love. But here's what I've learned. Being underestimated isn't a disadvantage. It can actually be your greatest advantage because it forces you to cultivate resilience. It gives you freedom to build without the pressure of constant scrutiny. And it creates the opportunity for you to surprise people, sometimes spectacularly. The amount of people who have been really shocked when I've shared with them what my business has been able to create and the life I've been able to create off the back of my business, I think it surprised a lot of people, and I'm not going to lie, I felt pretty smug. Sometimes sharing what I've been able to achieve, especially the people that perhaps did underestimate me. Now, I think women in particular, we often have experiences where we walk into rooms and there are assumptions that are made about us before we even open our mouths. So maybe we hear we're too young, we're too old, we're too emotional, we're too pretty, we're not pretty enough, we're too loud, we're not serious enough. We're often dismissed or overlooked or placed in boxes that don't fit. But what if we stop seeing these moments as setbacks and actually start using them as fuel? And what if being underestimated isn't a limitation but could actually be our secret weapon? So this is what the conversation is about today, turning those moments where people don't take you seriously into the very catalyst that actually propels you forwards. Now, you've probably felt that subtle sting of being underestimated before. Maybe you've been in a meeting where your idea's gone unheard. Maybe somebody else repeats it and, people pay attention to them, even though it was your idea. Maybe it's at a networking event where assumptions are made about what you must do for a living or how you make your money. Maybe it's the interview where you're sized up before you've even spoken. Maybe it's telling somebody about your new business and they're questioning whether you can be successful at it. Sometimes being underestimated, it's obvious. Sometimes it's almost invisible. But I think the effect is essentially the same. You are dismissed before you've had the chance to fully show who you are. And what I know to be true is that this dismissal rarely has anything to do with our capability. It's actually rooted in hidden biases that can often run very deep. So maybe it's gender expectations, things that are saying, women are too emotional to lead. Maybe it's assumptions that youth equals inexperience. Maybe it's judgments based on background or accent or appearance. Maybe it's certain industries where the tendency is to value extroversion over introverts. Even within the coaching and business space, I think women are often told or feel like they need to look or sound or act in a certain way in order to be credible. Definitely from my own experience, I felt like I had to have this very corporate, polished approach in my business to be taken seriously. And I've very much battled with that as I've gone through my journey. But as I was saying, underestimation, when you are on the receiving end of it, it can feel like, a punch in the gut. But what I know is that underestimation, it almost never reveals your actual capacity. It reveals the filters through which others are viewing you. So an example of this might be somebody, a hiring manager who's being conditioned to picture a leader as, somebody who's very confident, somebody who's very commands the room, somebody quite tall, somebody quite bold. Maybe it's a client who assumes that, this coach is only in her 20s, therefore she lacks the wisdom. Or maybe it's, she's a mother, so therefore she's going to lack commitment. Maybe it's a colleague whose own insecurity leads them to downplay your contribution so that they can feel bigger. None of these things are about you. They're about them. It's about their conditioning, their assumptions, their limits. And it goes even deeper than this, I think, because often when somebody does underestimate you, it's not just because they can't imagine you in a certain role, for example. It's because your very presence disrupts something in them. You become a mirror that reflects back their own inadequacies. So let's say, for example, you've got a colleague or maybe even a friend, and they are often downplaying your ability. What might actually be going on is that they're protecting themselves from the discomfort of recognizing their own stagnation. So I've seen this a lot in the business space where women have found that their friends are often not their biggest cheerleaders. And I think this is often one of the reasons. So it might be the friend or the family member that discourages you, maybe subtly, from pursuing your dreams because your courage highlights the risks that they never took or are perhaps never willing to take. In those moments, it's not really you that they're pushing against, it's the version of themselves that they're afraid to face. Your ambition calls out their complacency. Your success is magnifying their self-doubt. Your willingness to step into the unknown is awakening the places that they've chosen to stay safe. So being underestimated, it's rarely a reflection of your true power. Instead, it's a mirror showing you exactly how small someone else's imagination is. So when somebody says, for example, I don't see you as a business owner, or in my circumstance, I don't see you as a lawyer or a leader or a coach, what they're really saying is, I can't picture someone like you in that role because my vision is limited, not yours. And I think this is why underestimation can feel so sharp, because it's not neutral. It's often this defense mechanism. It's a way for others to manage their own discomfort. And once you realize this, everything shifts. You stop internalizing their doubt as truth. And instead, you actually see it for what it is. It's evidence that you're pushing boundaries that they never dared to push. So being underestimated then, it becomes less about rejection and more about revelation. It's revealing not just the smallness of somebody else's imagination, but the exact places where your light unsettles the shadows that they'd rather not face. And in that moment, you are given a choice. You can either internalize their projection and shrink yourself, or you can recognize it for what it is. It is an invitation to rise beyond their narrow-mindedness. Because every time somebody dismisses you, you gain an opportunity to surprise them, to expand beyond their assumptions. So the underestimation here, it becomes the fuel. It becomes proof, not of your lack, but of their inability to see the whole truth of you. Remember that being underestimated, it only will disempower you if you accept the story as truth. The moment you reframe it, you're going to stop seeing it as an insult, and it actually can become almost like a strategy. So let's say, for example, it's easy to interpret underestimation that it's proof that you're not far along enough. You're not experienced enough. You're not credible enough. But what if you actually flipped that narrative? What if others don't take you seriously? What if that isn't evidence that you're behind? It's actually evidence that you're just invisible to their radar. And invisibility can actually be an extraordinary power, because if they don't see you coming, they can't prepare for the impact that you're about to make. You're free to move in silence, build momentum, and then arrive with such a force that feels to them like it came from nowhere. So it's this, they just didn't see me coming. Now, when you are also dismissed, it can either drain you if you let it, or it can drive you. And the difference, I think, lies in how you hold it. So instead of internalizing someone else's doubt as your own, you can actually use it as fuel. Proof that you're walking a path that maybe few others can actually imagine. So for me, in my business journey, the people who didn't get it, I actually used that as my fuel. Proof that I was walking a path that only few others can imagine. you can kind of almost think of it as resistance training. The pushback isn't there to stop you, it's there to strengthen you. Each underestimation is another weight you are adding. Every time you rise above it, your power is going to multiply. Now, I also think there's an immense strategic advantage in actually being underestimated, because it allows you to work without the constant scrutiny. So you can incubate your ideas, sharpen your skills in private. You can build quietly without the noise or distraction. And then you can launch powerfully when the time is right. So this was very much a reflection of my own journey at the beginning stages. I wasn't really sharing much with anybody. I had my social media accounts, but it was something that I was kind of doing quite privately. I wasn't really sharing it with many people. And again, it was this element of surprise and, building quietly behind the scenes. It meant that I wasn't scrambling to prove myself along the way. I didn't have to prove myself to anybody. I was just staying in my lane and just really getting ready to blow out everybody's expectations when I did decide to step forwards. Underestimation, I think, it means no longer seeing it as a rejection of who you are, but as an opportunity to really cultivate who you're becoming. It's not about fighting to be taken seriously. It's about holding the power, knowing that you don't need to be taken seriously yet. Because when you decide to reveal the full force of your potential, those results will actually speak louder than any doubt ever could. I think the biggest gift of underestimation is that you get to decide what to do with it. It can either become the weight that keeps you small or the secret power that you carry into every room. So an example of this, one of my coaching clients, she is a senior leader in a very male-dominated industry. She was consistently being overlooked in meetings, and colleagues would often dismiss her suggestions. And instead of fighting to be heard, she actually just focused on the execution. And, within a very short space of time, she delivered results so undeniable that the same person who'd actually sidelined her in the meeting, these people were now coming to her, quoting her strategies back to her. And this element of surprise, it actually amplified her influence more than arguing ever could. So I think sometimes the most powerful statement you can make isn't spoken, it's actually just delivered in the results. I also think as well, inspiring stories of women who were rejected multiple times. They were underestimated. People like J.K. Rowling, people like Sophia Amoruso, the founder of Girl Boss, the author of Girl Boss. Her story in particular, she was going into investor meetings, spaces dominated by older men, and getting rejected time and time again. And rather than letting that rejection or underestimation deter her, she documented her entire journey and her story. She now has this very compelling story that became impossible to ignore. And those early no's became a part of her narrative, proof of her resilience and her vision. The same with J.K. Rowling. We've all heard the story of how many no's that she got. And again, these are proof of her resilience. So documenting your journey turns underestimation into the prelude, basically, of a story that people can't help but pay attention to. Something else that I often find myself working on with clients is especially women that are in leadership roles, whether they're in their own businesses, they're running their own teams, or maybe they're in their corporate space. It's actually redefining this need to feel like you have to prove yourself. This is often what happens when we feel like we're underestimated. We've got to then prove ourselves worthy. So I had this with a lady where she told me, I feel like I have to constantly prove myself. And I think the biggest shift came when she actually stopped aiming to prove and instead focused on her presence. So this was something that we worked on, how she used her voice, how she carries herself, how she claims her space, not to convince others of her worth, but to embody her worthiness for herself. Now, yes, being underestimated, it can be frustrating and it really stings, especially if you've been working hard towards something and you feel like you're being dismissed or your voice goes unheard, or you feel like you're producing something and nobody's paying attention. It will sting, especially when you are being seen through the narrow lens of somebody else's assumptions. And I think for many women, the initial instinct is to just really internalize that dismissal. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not ready. Maybe I don't belong here. But again, underestimation is not a story about you. It's a story about them, their worldview, their conditioning, their blind spots. And when you begin to recognize it as an external story, something that's being projected onto you, not something that belongs to you, you can then stop carrying the weight of it, and you can stop confusing their inability to see your brilliance with proof that it doesn't exist. And I think this second part is really transforming that dismissal into energy. So instead of allowing dismissal to deflate you, you can choose to let it be the thing that drives you. Think of every time somebody tells you no or you can't do this, think of that as your rocket fuel. Every door that closes is an invitation to build your own doorway. When you stop using dismissal as evidence against yourself and start using it as evidence of your courage, that's when everything changes. And you also need to redefine success on your own terms. So if you measure yourself by somebody else's limited definition of success, you will always feel like you're falling short. But when you write your own definition of success, whether it's building a business that feels good to you, creating impact through coaching, leading in a different way within your career, then being underestimated loses its power. You no longer chase validation from the people who could never imagine your vision in the first place. Now, if this message resonated with you today, then imagine learning how to coach yourself and perhaps others through these very challenges. And this is exactly what you can experience within the She Leads Academy. It's not just about becoming a coach, it's about mastering the tools to turn doubt, fear, and underestimation into courage, clarity, and leadership. You can actually start with a free trial of the She Leads Academy if you haven't done so yet. You can go to she-leads.co/free trial registration. I will leave that link in the show notes as well. And then just as a few final words, remember that we don't wait to be chosen. We choose ourselves. We don't ask for permission. We create permission for ourselves. And we don't crumble under other people's doubt. We turn it into power. The world may not always see you coming, but that is your advantage, because when they finally do, you will already be unstoppable. Thank you so much for tuning in, ladies, and I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode.
If today's episode lit something up in you and you are ready to build a coaching business that not only changes lives but creates the income and freedom you deserve, then right now you can request a free trial of our She Leads Academy coach training. To get your free trial, just head over to Instagram and visit us at she_leads.academy. You will find the link to the free trial in our bio. I cannot wait to see what's possible for you.